Welcome, everybody, to the Techmeme Ride Home Experience for April 14th. I'm sorry, I'm so confused because it's 11 a.m., which is a very strange and unusual time. But today is also a very big news day. Elon apparently wants to really get the edit button, and so is going to buy the whole company to make that happen. But before we get into that whole conversation, we've got Gergely, who writes the Pragmatic Engineer newsletter on Substack, which is, I guess, the number one technology newsletter. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a number one paid. Yeah,
number one paid. Well, congratulations. That's a quite the distinction. Here to talk to us about a number of things. One of which is the collapse of fast engineering culture. What the hell is going on with Atlassian? There's a whole bunch of like background noise and radiation kind of, I think, happening sort of in the tech space right now. And you've kind of got your finger on the pulse of it. But before we dive into some of the things you've been writing about, talking about, you want to start with a little more of an introduction, Brian? What do you think?
Yeah. So let's start this way. Let's talk about fast specifically at first, and then I want to talk about going into if you're a hire at a startup, the risks that could be involved, like a deeper dive into that, and then conversely, a deeper dive into, well, what if I join an established company, a FANG company or whatever. But before we do that, also let me state some priors here, which is, both of you have worked for startups, have worked for major tech companies, and I have not. I've never worked for anybody except for FedEx for 6 months.
Has it ever interested you, or is it that it doesn't interest you?
It just never happened. So,
okay.
But the reason I'm saying that is not to hi-hat anybody, but to say I want to be I want this episode to be educational for people that are like maybe gonna join a startup or a major tech company, and so I'm going to be the audience surrogate and ask dumb questions, also because I'm dumb about this. So, as I always say to Chris a lot of times, I'm going to play the dumb role because that's useful in this conversation. So, Gergely, let's start specifically with fast. The thing that I shared on the long reads last week was... But
actually, one more thing, though. I think Gergely needs to provide a little more background about his experience working for big tech companies, just to sort of set the groundwork. And then
Good idea.
Yeah. See, we're doing it on the fly.
All right.
Make it up as we go.
Let's do it. Yeah. So I've been a software engineer I was a software engineer for like a good 10, 15 years or so. I worked my way up slowly. So I started, I'm actually original from Hungary. So I worked at a local small shop. I moved to the UK, worked at agencies first. And then my first kind of step into a bigger company was at JP Morgan, where I worked at a trading desk, which is, like a big company, big money. It's a bank. And then I was lucky enough to join Skype right when Microsoft bought it. And Microsoft left Skype alone. So like for my whole time at Microsoft, it felt like Skype. It was a scrappy startup culture. We were doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And then I joined another startup called Skyscanner. And then I ended up at Uber. I joined Uber in Amsterdam when there were about 20 engineers in Amsterdam. Like there was an office of maybe 100 or 200 people. This was the European headquarters. And 4 years later, we were at about 150 engineers in that location. And my organization unit grew kind of 5x. And then my career also went like this. So before that, I kind of worked my way from a junior engineer to mid-level to senior to these levels. And then at Uber, I became a manager, starting from a few people in India. And I was leading a group at Uber who was doing payments. And the interesting thing with Uber is we talked about fast. I worked in a group at Uber called Uber Money, which was a large group of maybe 300 or 600 people. Fast is an Uber Money alumni. So co-founder, head of engineering, head of product, some other people who joined and left, they're all Uber Money. It's one of the reasons I was able to cover it so well. I just know so many people there, which was very interesting / weird. So yeah.
Yeah, but so much of what we're going to talk about is this idea of different cultures and expectations and things like that. But so using fast as a way into this conversation, one of the key things here to establish is that until 2 weeks ago, Fast was considered to be one of the rising stars of the startup world.
Maybe just say a little bit more about what Fast was
Fast
aspired to be.
Yes, Fast is, as we've discussed on the show, one of those one-click checkout companies.
Essentially, Amazon's patent on one-click checkout had expired
in 2017,
right? And that created the opening, for these guys to come in. Yeah.
And Fast, I suppose Bolt is probably the leader in the space.
Right. Yeah.
But Fast got an investment from Stripe, and so that was one of their sort of claims to prominence as well. And until about 2 weeks ago, everyone thought everything was good, including, as you said in your piece, that the people working there thought that, and I think this is a key thing, is people thought that, okay, there's tons of people being hired and we're just waiting on another round of funding. We have our main competitor, Bolt, at about, a $13 billion valuation. So clearly things are going in the right direction. And then 2 weeks later, everybody's fired and it's over. And so one of the first questions that I have for you specifically is, based on the people that you talked to internally, was it that rapid? Like, if you had talked to somebody a month ago today inside Fast, would they have told you that, yeah, everything's going great guns?
So I actually had a friend or a friend of a friend who was considering joining Fast from a year before, and he finally made a decision in November and started in February. And he actually asked my advice, and I told him, it looks fine. Here's a couple of flags that I see, but it's a startup. It's risky. There's all these things. This person actually, so I talked with this person extensively, didn't really see too much going wrong except for the last few weeks. For this person, the biggest thing, which was not reported, the co-founder went quiet. Allison, the co-founder, just stopped responding and completely unreachable. And this was the only thing. Except for this, they thought the Series C was coming. Some people joined in December. They were told, join quickly. They put an exploding offer in December because they said the Series C is inevitable and they're going to reprice the shares. And that's when their SVP of engineering joined. That's when their CFO joined. So people were convinced. And also the other thing is people were being hired. So my source told me every week there were new people starting because offers were extended earlier. And up to 3 weeks before Fast was shut down, 3 weeks before, 4 or 5 people started. So it looked completely normal.
And at the same time, because I think this is key to this is certainly key to what would be red flags in retrospect, and key to probably why they burned through $100 million in a year. They were paying extremely strong base salaries. They were offering extremely competitive stock compensation, right? Again, it felt like they were hiring with confidence, right?
They absolutely were. They hired amazing people on paper. Well, amazing people in general, but their pedigree was incredible. There's a person I talked with who worked at Google before, Facebook before that, and Microsoft before that, who joined Fast. And the reason they were able to do it, as you said, the cash salaries were as high as big tech, except you could work remote. And the stock looked really good because they did give a forecast of how much your stock will be worth when they're worth 12 billion, and Bolt was worth 11 billion. So that 12 looked realistic. And again, without looking at the underlying business metrics, everyone was really confident. In fact, I talked with some people later. There was just a really huge positive feeling in the company that they're doing something great. It's just going to succeed. Which, by the way, should be another flag because at a startup, it's a fight to the death. And Fast, they were not fighting to the death. They were not stressed. They were building all these, the people who joined later, I talked, they were architecting these massive systems to handle all this load, which, by the way, did not exist. So that was another thing. But obviously, the problem was the business metric was not there, and the business was not making money. No one knew except for the leadership and managers and engineers got above L6, so senior engineering managers and staff engineers above got a daily report of how much the business was doing, and the numbers were really small. They were so small that they were spending more on AWS in a month or close to as they were doing in terms of revenue. But engineers did not see this.
Well, see, I only know this because of your reporting from your newsletter, but three red flags in retrospect is number one, as you're just describing, they're building out a huge infrastructure for a business that isn't actually coming in, right? And then number two, once you get to a certain level and you see the daily metrics, you're like, well, but there's no money coming in. And then number three, something that you pointed out is that when they would talk to people, they would always use the hockey stick growth of the hiring, not revenue, not clients that were signing up for our one-click checkout. It was all about how much we're hiring. So when you combine those things, you actually did the math in the piece, where if you take a reasonable average of what they were paying all the engineers that they hired, it's easy to see how they could burn through $100 million in a month.
Absolutely. And to me, the hockey stick is the big one. You know who else used this hockey stick with the wrong y-axis? Hopin. Hopin is the events platform who did really well. Their hockey stick was valuation. So they showed how their valuation went so much faster to $5 billion than anyone else. But I would say one of the biggest red flags, if a company measures itself by headcount or valuation, it doesn't matter. You need to see something that says revenue or customers. Those two are actually VC fundable metrics, right? Because these companies, they're not going to be profitable from day one. But to get funding, you need to show that. And the best advice I've gotten from people who've been there and reflected on this, before you join a startup, ask two questions. One, do you have your business metrics defined that tell us if the company is successful? Two, does everyone have access to those close to real time? If the answer is no to either of these, consider not joining that startup, because that startup does not have their priorities straight. But either they're incompetent or they're hiding something.
Well, I do want to come back to that, because I do want to go down your list of suggestions for joining a hot startup. But essentially, is it... there's no way we can speculate in terms of the founders and their motivations. And although there's a now infamous 20-minute VC episode that is live that people can listen to, but do you, based on your conversations with insiders, I've heard this too, that people loved the culture, loved the people they were working with, and loved and felt like they were doing good work. And so in theory, is this a situation where the founders drank the Kool-Aid as well and were convinced that, okay, our main competitor is already over a $10 billion valuation. All we've got to do is raise this Series C. It's all going to be fine because we're going to get $400 million in our next round. So let's just hire, go full hog. Like, is this not... It's not fraud. It's maybe just incompetence in the sense that they also were overly excited.
Yeah, so like this is a thing where I think some people compared it to the Fire Festival, which ripped off like actual people who paid their money. And in this case, like that did not happen. The people who were hired, they got a great salary. They got paid. In the Fast Festival, employees did not get paid. So everyone got paid. They were drinking the Kool-Aid, yes. There is a question. I think the only question goes back to the competence of the founders. Like, what founder is someone who cannot calculate their runway or who does not, is able to forecast a fundraising? And that's it. Like, I think it's safe to say the founders are incompetent in running a business, because if the employees have to find out the last minute that the money is all gone, that is not a good business. I think that's just fair to say.
It's incompetency on the founder to not see that you're burning that quickly, even if you feel like that there's a monster around.
I mean, the founders should see the metrics.
And the board. But anyway, Chris, and
the board. So founders and the board, yes.
Right. Chris, please jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been very useful to sort of, one, sort of go through some of these, the red flags and some of these issues and concerns, around burn rate, and runway, of course. I pinned a tweet, to, one of my favorite tweets from John Borthwick, which of course is, I think it's, what is the animation? Regardless, there is a dog essentially assembling a train track as the train is speeding down the track. And that is what he describes as entrepreneurship. And I think in many respects, that's true. And if you're blitzscaling a startup, there is this almost this need to like keep building and burning and driving. I mean, think about like a rocket launch, and the amount of energy that it takes to sort of, get into the atmosphere, and the gas that's burned at, a certain level, until you reach, cruising altitude or, outer orbit or something. In startups that do have product market fit, and I think Uber is a good example of this, you do need to be spending a shit ton of money. I mean, the reason why some of these companies raise is for that purpose, because they want to essentially take over the market as fast as possible before anybody else can. I think it's a really, really challenging dance to figure out what the right level of aggressive and like super aggressive burn is relative to being super savvy and having the right level of metrics that's tracking your progress and your success.
But conversely, hiring at the top. Listen, being pro-engineer,
I don't know how else you attract that talent without actually putting that in,
but
right? So
the only point I wanted to make is what you're describing, or what Fast was doing, is the inverse of the lean startup model. They were going big.
Right. But okay. So what I'm trying to do, okay. And I want to set this up before we get into some of the advice and the tips, because I think that this is very important to understand from a macro, I don't know, like sort of economic context, right? You have a bunch of consumer software, social web, social media stuff, very, very cheap to build, essentially, especially, in the era of AWS. Then you move into a world where you're building software for the real world. And by that, I mean Uber. Like Uber was one of the first that really kind of brought a lot of the mechanics of digital technology, through the iPhone and through GPS into being able to manipulate the real world and book a car. And so the amount of people and engineers that you needed on the ground to be, building these systems and adapting to local laws and regulations, and to have these, sort of remote, distributed, decentralized teams out there in the world that were quite autonomous, that did require a huge amount of money. Fast, in contrast, is entirely SaaS based, and they were building software. They weren't really interacting with the real world. Yes, they were doing payments, and payments, in fintechs are typically quite expensive, but they're essentially trying to do one-click checkout for the web, which, I'm sorry to say, but having worked on OpenID and identity solutions back in 2007 through 10, I mean, there were existing technologies and solutions. And yes, there are, product challenges and adoption challenges, and doing the integrations, was always hard, but you don't need, at least, again, I don't know, I wasn't at Fast, the same level of money to execute on that opportunity. However, you need a ton of money if you want to hire the top talent and blitzscale. So my sense and feeling, looking back on this, is that, Fast had so much Uber DNA that like the Uber folks kind of brought that mentality, right, to a SaaS environment. And, it's interesting because Dom, Fast's CEO, his previous startup was Uber-like. In that it was called Tow, and it was based in Australia, and he had built out this network where, if the government, I guess, wanted to tow a car or something, they would, use his service essentially to book an Uber style tow truck, and then, go and, I don't know, like tow the thing or something, right? So that also had real world aspects. So if you're used to spending for those types of environments, and then you bring that into the software world, then I can start to see how some of those distortions in spend would happen. I also can see how, if you have a lot of Uber, like DNA in the company, that when you go out to investors, you use the same Uber playbook and pitches to justify how much you're spending. And I think that's one of the things that it's important to look at when evaluating and thinking about these companies. Like, what are they solving for? Where are their real, costs? And when their product actually hits the market, is that market the real world? Is it the virtual world? Is it, and how do you sort of think about that from the headwinds that the company might be facing? Okay, so I'll step back, but I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, Chris, I'd like to respond to that, because both of us worked at Uber, right?
Exactly, that's right. And we overlapped in 2016, so.
Yeah, and there's a huge difference between Uber and Fast, and I think Fast isn't realized. So I worked at Uber starting from year 5 or year 6, depending on how we look at it. But 5 years later, 5 years after the first engineer was hired, and I talked with the first 5 engineers extensively to understand what they did. And unlike the first 2 years of Uber was very different than the first 2 years of Fast. Uber was always very cheap in hiring people. Sorry, they paid them well, but you could only hire an engineer if you had a revenue target. If like we had to say, even when I was there in 2016 and 2017, later this changed, but I had to make a case. Basically, if I said I can make $10 million with one engineer, I got it approved. If I said I can make $1 million with an engineer, it did not get approved. Uber was always very efficient and very focused on only hiring people who brought in revenue. My sense is that, first of all, some of the people who Fast hired, they were not early Uber, not early years. They were a lot later. They joined in when Uber was big. It was this big, it was more similar to Google in many ways, where you were more disconnected. We were used to longer term plans. That's one. And I feel the company might have cargo culted this, let's pretend to do these things. But one thing that they missed, that Uber did not miss, and some of the other startups that early on scaled up, including Netflix, did not miss, those companies all tied hiring to revenue. You only hire the person to bring in more revenue or more customers. And that did not seem to be there. I think people believe that they're building something bigger and they don't have to worry about it. So that's an interesting.
I think that totally, I think, actually tracks and adds more depth to what I'm trying to point out, which is that oftentimes the last company that you were at, or the last couple companies you were at, will inform the way that you approach and solve problems. And so if you were part of, the Uber rocket ship, right, then you would bring some of that hustle, some of that fastness, some of that ownership, some of the cultural values, to the new company that you find yourself at. And it kind of becomes a set of heuristics that you use to, solve problems. You're like, oh, I solved this problem before at this other company. But I think that your point is really well taken, which is around discipline when, hiring and bringing people on that are actually going to, hit the bottom line in a very positive way. And I think in Fast case, I'm not even sure that they had necessarily product market fit, right? Because on the one hand, yes, Amazon, of course, in the one-click checkout thing, powered a lot of their business. It's not too dissimilar from Uber, getting into the idea of mobile one-click, book a car kind of ideas. But you have to build the entire service apparatus around that takes advantage of it and actually creates an elegant solution. And the fact that Fast had to rely on third parties implementing and adopting its solution and couldn't, I imagine, I don't know, go deeper into the customer experience is probably one of the reasons why there was, one, so much hiring, so much headwinds, and also that you couldn't, I don't know, it just felt like that visual that I was describing with the dog, building the railroad tracks feels like they were like, oh, just around the corner, we're going to, make a new investment and it's all going to work out. And all the money that we spent on this is going to be fine. And we're going to keep the rocket going, when in fact, the fundamentals were completely flawed.
Absolutely. Plus, one other interesting thing, I guess, is two things. One is there's this joke: if you want to wreck your startup, hire someone from Google, because there's this notion of that they'll come in and they'll expect they'll expect what's at Google, or they're going to build out whatever is at Google. For example, a lot of Google hires in management, they're going to put a performance review framework in place wherever they go. It doesn't matter; it's the same as Google, and you don't need that at startup. That's one. But the other is there's an exception to this. Which is Replit. Replit is a startup. They're kind of a coding playground, so you can code through the browser and you can run your code, debug your code. It's got billions of runs and tens of millions of people are using it. This company, they hire from Google and from Facebook, but guess what? So this company is valued almost at 1 billion people. They have, I think, 40 employees, 40. So there are the startups which highly leverage really good people, but they hire very, very few of them, and they're scaling very carefully to not go over cash flow. But I would worry about any startup which is hiring in bulk from big tech without product market fit or without a good reason, as you said, Chris.
Yep.
Many consider Renaissance Technologies' Medallion Fund as the best hedge fund of all time. From 1988 through 2018, the fund returned 66% per year. That means if you invested $10,000, you'd cash out with over $200 million. Their secret sauce? Quantitative investing. Medallion is run by an army of computer scientists, mathematicians, and neural engineers that build investing algorithms that eliminate typical human biases. And that makes sense. 66% of us regret making impulsive investment decisions. But unless you're a PhD-wielding Python-coding Excel wizard, quant trading has been out of reach. Until now. Introducing Composer.trade, the premier platform for building and investing in quantitative strategies. Composer.trade is putting the power of quant into the hands of regular investors with their game-changing super app. With Composer.trade, you can invest in strategies like buy the dips, NASDAQ, or leveraged inflation hedge. You can even build your own strategy from scratch with their drag-and-drop portfolio editor. Put the power of quant in your portfolio by going to composer.trade/ride today. That's composer.trade/ride. Also visit composer.trade/brochure for disclaimers. Vultr is the infrastructure cloud. Vultr offers high-performance cloud compute, bare metal, storage, and managed Kubernetes. Vultr offers 12 pre-selected operating systems, including Windows, as well as the ability to bring your own ISO. Their advanced networking features are optimized for multi-cloud deployments thanks to VPC peering and Direct Connect instances, starting as low as $2.50 a month. And they offer more locations, 23 as of today, than DigitalOcean and Linode combined. The Vultr Marketplace offers one-click installation of more than 50 applications and operating systems, including instant Minecraft and other game servers, voice over IP and VPN platforms, content management systems, WordPress included, and cPanel. And right now, they are offering you an exclusive 30-day $150 code for sign-up. To get this amazing offer, go to getvultr.com/techmeme. Now, Vultr is spelled VULTR, so that's getvultr, getvultr.com/techmeme. Just hit up the link in the show notes, getvultr.com/techmeme. Vultr, develop locally, deploy globally. All right, this is a perfect time to mention some of the advice that you had in your piece for if you're joining a hot startup, because then we'll seg into, okay, you don't want to take the risk of joining a hot startup, go to an established tech company. But the first thing that you say is you can ask for numbers, and well, that's not the first thing you said. The first thing you said was do your own research. Actually, because didn't you actually, someone reached out to you from Fast to be hired, and you Googled around about the founders?
Well, Fast is Uber money, right? Like it's I know people, and the person who reached out to me, I know that person, I trust them. But then I did some research and I found this article on the founder, which showed that, in my reading, it showed that this person did not have really problems with going to morally questionable things like selling personal information. And I decided I would not work at a place which is CEO. And also his last company went bankrupt. And well, I guess, surprise.
That can happen.
Anyway,
past performance is not always,
right? Like I decided that I did my research and I didn't like what I saw. But I also didn't like the name change. And this was me. I did my research. My point is, if you don't do your research, don't blame it on anyone. So,
but that's the point, is that a simple Google search, you found the founder changed his name. The founder had these questionable things in his background. And so you're like, that's not for me. So number one, simply do your due diligence, which, getting back to the thing that I said first, which was ask for numbers. Again, if you're someone that is interviewing at a startup, you could put on a venture capitalist hat and evaluate the company's chances. Because what are you going there for? You are going there for the potential for life-changing money if this company is successful. And
but Brian, just be careful about that, because the things you're going for as an investor, right, and making lots of money absolutely can be one of your reasons for joining a startup, right? But if you want to get early enough into something where it is going to be life-changing, fuck you money kind of thing, you've kind of got to be so early as to be unclear that the thing's going to work out, in which case, if it doesn't, hold on, if it doesn't work out, then you do need to be choosing for the people and for the experience and for all the things that go into actually working on something that you really, really, care about, right? Like,
okay, I'll grant you that, and I'll give you the nuance way to say it.
Yeah.
Yes, exciting idea, exciting team, people that I love, putting a dent in the universe, all that is great. At the same time, you have your career is finite. And so you do have to put on a certain hat that says, is this a strategic good move? And the key that I think Gergely says when you ask for numbers is you can interview the interviewer. You can ask for,
right.
Yes, you can ask for, show me some numbers on a piece of paper. Give me some graphs. Show me the hockey stick, but let me look at what the y-axis is. Like, that is okay to do, right?
But you've also got to be pretty savvy. Like, one, to know the right set of questions. Two, to understand aspects of the business. Now, maybe that should be the case when you go to work for anybody, that could be, right?
But at the very least, if that is something that turns them off, that would be something that would be interesting to learn.
I mean, it's interesting because, like, when again, I talked with early Uber, like the top 5 employees, they had no clue.
That's what I'm wondering.
Like the idea, they like the people, but back then, the numbers did not add up. So there is an element of, like, you can't really do it, and especially, I think it depends on what level you are, right? Like, the more senior you are. So if you're a software engineer, where you're absolutely employable, whatever happens, sure, just take a risk. You like the people, do it. But you don't need to do too much due diligence. If you're a director of engineering or a VP of engineering and you're kind of late career, you absolutely need to do these things. And maybe the people did do it. I'm still surprised that they managed to get the CFO of Venmo join as their money was running out,
right?
Which was an interesting career move. SVP of engineering from Okta, which, again, like, those people, like, for them, it will be a little bit more painful, but clearly they'll have a good network. I mean, also at the same time, we should give kudos to the founders for selling this, right? Like, they managed to attract really good people who had a lot of other options, and they chose it. So I don't know how they did it, but that, like, in this case, this start didn't work out, but the founder charm clearly was there, which it did go for the company. I think we should, acknowledge that. And this company didn't work out, so, like, it might not seem positive, but a lot of companies work out because the founders can attract people, like Fast has.
Okay, this is how I want to seg into the reverse side. So this is thinking about I'm an engineer or any sort of employee, whatever, and maybe I'll join the hot new startup. Maybe I leave a FANG company to join the hot new startup. But I'm going to read from your piece. You say base salary is the risk-free component of any compensation offer. Equity is less risky for publicly traded companies. However, public equity has its own risks. So the risk here for Fast, for a startup, is that it goes to zero. So let's talk about, and then we can talk about culture and things like that when you join an established, maybe even publicly traded company. But this is for both of you, actually. So what are the risks in terms of, if I were to join any publicly traded company today, it is, in terms of, like, the stock options that you get, how much of the risk is in, like, if you're, Facebook is down, what, 30% from its highs, 40% or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, like 6 months, yeah.
So what happens if you get an offer from Facebook? Like, what sort of thinking, and this is for anybody, either of you, would go into that? Like, are you betting on a bounce back, or, like, what do you think about established companies, especially public traded ones?
So this used to be an easy answer a few years ago. And, like, here's the thing, like, a lot of software engineers are incredibly lucky. Software engineers are one of the few professions where you get executive level of compensation for not being executives. Any other industry you look around, the people who are getting these type of ridiculously high offers that senior software engineers do are all executive directors somewhere. But software engineers are in demand. That's why we're getting it. That's one. The other thing is, most of us software engineers have no clue how this works. In the last 8 to 10 years, from 2010, the thinking was you join up a FANG, a Facebook, Alphabet, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, or Amazon. And they were called FANG because up to 2015 or 2016, their stock growth was very strong, and it kept on. And the thinking was the stock will only go up. You join them, you get a grant, it'll be higher. This was our kind of very simple thinking, and it kind of worked. It's like Moore's Law. It worked until it didn't. And now it's starting to not work. So now software engineers need to realize that if you're getting a large equity package, an executive level equity package, if you want to make the most of it, you need to think like an executive or an investor, which goes back to actually, like I would recommend software engineers listen to like read the VC resources. I subscribe to Newcomers Letter and I track all these things because it's, I can try to give some quick advice, but it's all the same. You need to understand like how the market works, why it's up, why it's down. When interest rates goes up, why is that bad news for late stage companies? These kind of it's all the same, except you're not. So you're now a stock investor in whatever company you're at, which is a situation a lot of engineers are not used to. We were used to tech just going in one way, and that was all.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's kind of both challenging and interesting about this conversation and the timeliness of it, one, of course, there are macro market trends that are, changing, and that, for a lot of engineers or a lot of people in the tech world, we haven't necessarily experienced. I mean, there was like a lot of crazy stuff happening in the 80s, when I was in grade school, that may be coming back again, and I don't have any context for those things. And so when it comes to making some of these decisions, to Brian's point, I mean, there is a calculus or a calculation that you can make. But at the end of the day, you are essentially making a set of informed bets based on your life stage, based on your goals, based on what you're trying to achieve, based on the lifestyle that you want, based on a number of different trade-offs. And you kind of have to take a stab at where you think, one, you're going to have the most happiness, or two, maybe, you're thinking about your risk tolerance based on where you are in your career, based on people who may depend on you, whether you want to, have a family or contribute to those things, and how much, like the startup lifestyle will enable or disable the type of life that you actually want to lead. And this is kind of why I was pushing back on Brian's point about making a purely, I don't want to say rational, but purely economic decision about where you go to work. I mean, you're going to have to get up every day, hustle super hard, deal with, schedules that are out of your control and all sorts of other things to sort of make this thing that doesn't exist turn into reality, as opposed to, going to maybe an established player or a FANG company, and dealing or working in a place where there's a lot of, established procedures and there's clear culture and there's, documentation or in theory. And maybe it's not, super maintained, but, like at least there's trappings of it. Whereas in a startup, you're just building all the time. You don't have to have time necessarily to do all the documentation. So again, like I guess part of the thing that I think is really important in thinking about this, and you sort of alluded to it, Gergely, that in joining Uber early, of course, there were things that you sort of knew or could imagine working out or happening. But of course, there's a whole host of things that are completely unpredictable or very hard to predict. I mean, the number of things that were trying to kill Uber as it was, coming into being were legion, and it sort of did kind of create this early culture that was really resistant to a lot of those outside forces and to that negativity. I don't know, although I was going to say I don't know how that tracks or applies to a place like Fast, where clearly people both saw dollar signs as well as the opportunity to be in a culture that gave them a lot of flexibility and gave them a lot of support, and probably was like an amazing kind of opportunity. I mean, if you were there early enough and fast, you were like, I'm on another rocket ship. Like this thing's going to be, super meaningful and super valuable. And then, in a matter of moments, the whole thing dissipates, and all of your financial plans and aspirations and hopes that you thought were going to, turn into something once the company was worth $12 billion suddenly becomes worth nothing. And so all of those plans that you had made and all those considerations and calculations, you can go back and you can check your math and you can, reconsider the decision that you made. But, you made a bet and you placed your bet, and this is how the cards turned up. And that is just part of like the startup game. So I think if you want comfort and security, obviously a much larger, boat, like an aircraft carrier going with FANG isn't going to rock that much, but you're also not going to get the highs, of getting into, a turbojet or something and having that experience.
I feel we're kind of going full circle. So like 6 or 7 years ago, where startup Al Jackson published an article saying why you should work for startups, and his point was, I think it was like, don't work for startups for the money, because you're not going to get any money. Just accept that you're not going to get a debt. Your options will be zero.
Right.
Go there, like he said, go there for the experience. Go there to grow a team, grow there, how to learn to manage, because you're go crazy until the startup goes bust or something happens. And actually at Fast, that's what happened with a lot of people. So I know some people, even from Uber, who joined them. It seems to me it's a net positive for them. They got a lot bigger responsibilities. They hired teams. They grew. They created product lines, and you can argue about how much revenue they brought. But they did all this stuff. And if you go to a startup and you're okay with your options being worth zero, and you're getting a positive from there, you might be a lot better off actually. And startup Paul Jackson said, which I think is still true, that if you want to make the most money with the lowest risk, go to a publicly traded company. Do it. Like that is the way to do it. The work will be more boring. It's hard to get in there, but that's how it worked. That's how it always worked, by the way. It worked with IBM or when Microsoft was a risky thing. And you have to get lucky with the companies. So as I really like Chris, think about your risk appetite, and that my 2 cents is honestly think about people's careers are long these days. Few people retire early. If you think that you're going to have a 40-year career, it's cool to do a few years in a startup, knowing that you might not make that much. You figure out when that might be a good stage for you. Maybe you first save up some money. Maybe you don't need to do that. But my strong thinking is that work at a startup and work at a large tech company. And once you've done the two, you're going to know so much more about your strengths, your weaknesses, and you'll be a lot more employable.
Yep. Now, to seg a little bit, you've also written eloquently about joining an established company from an engineering perspective and showing up and feeling like, whoa, this is not, on an engineering quality level, this is not what I thought it was. There's lots of things that I could go into in this one, but just give me your thoughts as an engineer. If you go the route of joining an established company and feeling like either the culture or the quality of the engineering is not, if you're thinking, well, this is a safer bet or this is a more established thing, but finding when you get there, it's maybe more chaotic than you expected. What is your high level thinking in terms of, from a software engineer perspective, you show up and you're like, man, this kind of seems like a cloud show, which I didn't expect?
My thinking overall is you need to keep an open mind. So when you go into a startup, that's, I was joking how Google engineering goes into a startup doesn't really end well, especially Google engineer who's been at Google for 5 or 10 years, because they have a way of thinking. But if that engineering goes into an open mind saying, I know to expect chaos at a startup, they'll be fine, right? And they'll adopt better. Same thing with large tech companies. From the outside, somehow we all idolize them and they don't make too many mistakes, and we somehow think they're a lot cleaner. And by the way, a lot of teams are like that. But usually, everyone I talked to, I had someone who actually joined Twitter, and they told me, "Oh, my old startup, we used to have 15-minute continuous deploys. I pushed the code in 15 minutes in production. At Twitter, on their team, at 6 hours." And they're like, "What happened? I got an upgrade on title. I got a lot more money. I feel I'm back in Stone Age." The point is, go in there with an open mind, because you're going to learn things and you don't understand the history. That company was a startup at one point and it turned into something else. So the best thing that happened to me is go with a low ego. Don't try to bring in all these, people have these ideas that everything must be great and there must be great tests and linting and all of these things at big startups. And the biggest mistake they do when we hired a senior engineer at Uber, they will come into it and in the first month they will want to fix our code quality, and because they felt that as a big company we should have that, and we didn't need it at that time. So go in with an open mind, help your team first, pick up the rhythm. The number one suggestion I have is start working the way people are working, even if it makes no sense. And a story I keep telling myself, which I wasn't there, but it's a really good story. In the early 2000s, when Facebook was growing like crazy, they hired Kent Beck. And Kent Beck created extreme programming, and he was a huge test-driven development fan. He might have created test-driven development, I'm not sure, but he was part of it. He's the Agile Manifesto guy. And back in that time, for software development, everyone did what Kent Beck was saying. So he shows up at Facebook and he organizes a test-driven development talk, and people can attend these talks and no one shows up. And then he realizes that Facebook does no unit testing, which went against every conventional wisdom at the time. And he kind of sucked up his pride, and he started to work the way they worked, and realized that Facebook is just different to every company, because Facebook didn't need unit tests because they use customers to test for them at scale. The point is, like, just, let go of your, for the first few months, just keep an open mind, like, turn into a sponge and just like go with the flow, take things in. You'll be so much better off for it. The same thing happened for me at Uber. I was shocked at how bad things were, but I was like, well, you know what? It's the world's like most valuable company at the time I was there. They must know something that I don't. And I learned a few things. I was able to see later what they were missing. So yeah, don't expect the world. It might be shiny, but it's not gold.
Well, again, this piece, I could go down the list of the things that you recommend. Like, if it depends on what team you land on. Like, if it's a prototype team, like, the quality of the engineering doesn't matter. If it's before product market fit, a similar thing. But one of the things, and this is my last thing, and Chris, you can jump back in. I heard that, but for someone, again, I've never been in this situation. One of the things that I feel like, if you haven't been a part of a big organization before, I'm going to read this from your piece. When products start to miss the business metrics that they should hit, they become at risk for their headcount getting reduced or being shut down altogether. People think that established companies that you can't lose, but at the same time, that's not how it functions. Like, there could be succeeding and failing startup cultures inside all of these product things. And so if you're expecting stability, you can't necessarily, that's not necessarily what you will find, depending on what team or what product you show up to work on, right?
Absolutely. As you said, I feel large companies are a mix of startups that just have better funding, but they do get shut down. And especially what you don't see. And okay, last advice is like, work at a startup, work at a large company, become a manager at one point when you have the opportunity, because you start seeing stuff. As a manager, you are afraid of your team being shut down, and people might not get fired. Sometimes they do, but of them being sent to do something else. So there is fear. There is fear of failure. It's not as strong necessarily as a startup, but there is that thing, and you will do stuff that makes no sense, but it makes perfect sense once you understand the context. The large company context is just very different. They're not stupid. It's just different, and it takes a little time to understand. The same way as learning a language, the grammatical rules look stupid at first, but once you learn it, you realize there's a reason for it.
Yeah, I mean, just the thing that I wanted to add to that is, and I think this does happen as you mature, I suppose, that you start to build up some level of respect and consideration for, like, I don't want to say like your elders, but the folks who came before and were solving problems. And what I find oftentimes in younger startups, is a certain hubris and arrogance and ignorance, which sometimes is completely necessary in the startup game in order for people to get started, to say, well, the way you do something is so stupid. Like, we have all these things now. We have AWS. We have like sunk infrastructure that is now part of, I guess, the solution space that wasn't there when a lot of these companies were being started and being founded. And so they were built with a different set of assumptions and solving for a different set of, needs and requirements. And oftentimes at a, breakneck pace where they were just solving for that, momentary problem. And they weren't thinking necessarily about like the long-term implications. And then there are these huge rewrites that oftentimes are contemplated and considered and then executed on, which then can take years and years and years that actually never materialize, because you're trying to sort of solve problems from a different era with a different level of urgency. And you're trying to also anticipate everything that could ever happen, almost like in a legalistic way. And it's just not possible. So I think it's important, I guess, I'm building on what you're saying, to come in with that sense of respect and awareness that the experiences that you have had as someone who's not part of that culture or did not build, the thing or the scaffolding, like there is a new recipe or a fusion perhaps to occur, but coming in and just blowing everything up because you're like, oh, I don't like the way you do these things. And, like you said, like, oh, I used to do these things at Google, and so therefore that's the way to do it correctly, is actually quite wrong. because the nature of the environment and the skills even of the people who are part of that environment need to be part of your kind of consideration framework for making changes. So it's actually much more important. And I don't like, actually, I'm curious how you approach this, Gergely, like from a listening and learning perspective while also needing to build and execute. One of the things that I remember that was, I guess, famous for Facebook in the earlier days is that on your first day, you had to commit something and launch it to get you into the cadence of how fast Facebook moved, right? And that was in opposition to other places and other cultures where you had either a waterfall software development method that was very slow and considered, and you had to like write all these tests and make sure the thing didn't go down because the systems weren't built for that level of fault tolerance. But Facebook came along and said, no, we want to actually move much, much faster. And like you said, we're going to test on live users, and hey, if it breaks, no problem, move fast and break things. And so they were trying to retrain their culture, or at least train up a culture that had a bias for action as opposed to a bias for consideration. So how do you, I guess, sort of advise, engineers to take that approach where they are being evaluated at how fast they need to execute, and at the same time, you don't want to necessarily bring in all your known patterns into this new space, which, in which they might be inappropriate or just not really well calibrated?
Yeah, so if you're working at like companies that actually have good onboarding, which actually, for example, at Uber, we invest a lot on. If you're lucky, it's easy because you join, you're told to ship on week one, and a lot of companies, by the way, all the better run companies, they do this whole thing of like ship on the first week or try to do it even earlier, and then that's easy. And I have seen this at Uber, the longer someone takes to actually ship their first change in production and just contribute to a project, the worse they're going to be off because they're going to be starting thinking about stuff. They'll draw up, like we had a staff engineer who joined us, started drawing up architectural diagrams because didn't have anything else to do for months, and then in the end got fired because this person didn't understand what was going on. Yeah. But like if you don't have this, you're not as lucky to be told to just keep your heads down, because at Uber, even for the most senior engineers, at least, we try to tell them just learn, like just do the stuff, like do the coding, even if you're not going to be coding like 90% of the time later on, just do all these things. The best thing I can do, like there's this book called The First 90 Days, which I recommend to every software engineer, and it's everyone when you join a company. In the first 3 months, people like decide how they're going to look at you, and after the next year, no matter what you do, they're going to remember your first 90 days. So the best thing you can do is at any company that you join is just be productive and play by the rules of how they're doing it, and don't appear too smart. So like save those things. So what I recommend to people is, first of all, start a note and make a note of everything that you can see being improved or not making sense. It's going to be a document with like questions and observations. And for the questions, just ask people. Be super curious. What happened? How did it go? Talk to the old timers. Why did you do it? But hold yourself from like just make a note for all the things that you want to suggest, but don't suggest anything just yet. Ship stuff like as fast as you can. Like overdo your onboarding. Do it faster. Get nosy into other projects and just help people, but do it in their way. And after 2 or 3 months, if you've done this, you earn respect, because what a lot of people forget is your team needs to respect you to listen to you. But once they see that you can actually do stuff the way they do, you're kind of like one of them. That you picked up the pace. Like if this, they see you as a peer, then they'll start to listen to you. Especially if you're a really productive peer who now starts to help people. This is an approach that I've seen work every single time. The problem that gets in the way is the more experienced people are, the smarter they are, and the more they feel that they need to do changes on day one, which starts resistance. And it goes into politics, which is people's influence. You're not going to know the dynamics on the team until you've just kind of worked side by side and people trust you and they tell you the real scoop and all those things. So this is the one thing I know always works. There might be some other ways, and Chris, I'm interested if or Brian, if any of you have, but that's what I've seen consistently. And this is a combination of be curious, be humble, and put in the work. In the first like few months, just focus on helping the most that you can. Put away your pride, and then later you'll have all these opportunities open up for you.
That sounds like good advice to me. I'm going to ask a question again from being naive have never been in this situation. And this is for both of you. How much does cohort or generational stuff matter? Like even in your piece, you're talking, there could be a team that has been brought on by acquisition, right? And then there's the team over there when it was only 8 people and they've been through the wars and they're all veterans and things like that. So this is, again, for both of you, in your experience, to what degree when you're in a big company, is it sort of like, well, you weren't there at the beginning, or, well, you came over here from that acquisition, or you know, like how much of it is like this sort of click style thing where it has to be siloed because we do it this way over here, we do it that way over there? Like how much of that can be actually sanded down, or does it, based on your experience, kind of always operate independently?
I mean, it sounds like you're talking a little bit about ossification and also territoriality. And, you know, I'll just
politics.
Yeah, okay, politics. Like I'll tee a few things up, you know, and then Greg, I'm obviously curious to hear your experience. Like, I think it really depends on the team to some degree. And it also depends on kind of like the ultimate culture that you're moving into. My experience at Uber, you know, was such that, like, well, one, I mean, the team that I was on was quite young. We were the developer platform team. And so we were, you know, figuring out a lot of things. There was a lot of internal churn from people moving from one team to another. And so there was no ossification in that sense. There was a lot of dynamism. There was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of chaos. And so and I think I was actually quite, I don't want to say like unprepared, but, you know, relative to my experience at Uber, which was, you know, it did feel like you were a part of a flotilla of just many large, seasoned, you know, kind of organizations with obviously like a ton of money and certainty behind them. And so when you were taking, you know, big risks and bets, you know, you always had the core business to kind of fall back on in some respects, whereas Uber was fighting for its life and its existence, at least throughout the period that I was there, and had to really prove something to the world. So in that sense, it was more like, hey, we are, you know, kind of jogging / running forward. Once you join the team, like, hurry the hell up and start doing stuff that seems useful. If someone, you know, is, I don't know why I'm thinking about sort of like a war deployment or something, but, you know, like if you're going to be part of like the team that drops in, you know, behind enemy lines or something, like you just got to like learn on the go, you know, ask the right questions, observe, kind of constantly be checking yourself and making small incremental kind of contributions here and there, and then finding those opportunities where you see a space that you can, you know, kind of establish, you know, what you're doing in a way that shows that you've learned kind of what the priorities of the organization are, what your team's priorities and needs are, and you can contribute in those ways. There were certainly managers at Google, you know, that were quite territorial, and I would say in some ways maybe, you know, personally insecure. You kind of wanted to steer away from them because they weren't really motivated to help you to grow, to learn, and to achieve. Whereas in other teams that I've been a part of, where that there was a kind of egolessness, you were brought in, and as long as you contributed, you know, and made an impact, you were cool. You know, you kind of went along with it. But Gergely, how was your experience?
So what I see is like one of the biggest differentiators that I see is in talking about kind of modern, like well-run startups and companies. Every company works in a way that there's a team and they have a mission. And they kind of like, they're not told exactly what to do, but they're told what metrics they should care about and, you know, like what things to move. Every team is like this. Now, if you're in an organization where your team has a lot of free space ahead of them, basically they have 5 or 10 times more work than they can handle. It's going to be a great place to work in the sense that there's going to be no politics because everyone is stretched as hell, and everyone will be happy for you to help. Like you can approach anyone and say, "Can I help?" And they'll be like, "Yes, take on this, please," or you know, "Help me with this." If you're at a place where the team does not have as many things to do, they might actually have more people than work to do. There's going to be a lot of politics because people will be elbowing and they're going to try to work on this project by themselves or to claim that they've done it to get a promotion and all that stuff. It becomes more toxic. And that, like, there's managers, so depend, you know, there's people on the team. But the biggest two things I've seen this at Uber, I've seen it on my team. When I joined, we had so much stuff to do and it was a great time. We just had a reunion and everyone talked about that year where we had so much to do. And like we all had huge impact. Like people made millions of dollars by like shipping a bug fix. And then later, the same team, we didn't have as much stuff to do, and we started to kind of, you know, like there were too many cooks in the kitchen. So I think that's the biggest difference, and that's a great reason to join a startup, by the way, because at a big company, yes, you might make more money, you might be more stable, but you actually just might feel that you're not like you're kind of doing like 1/10 of the work that you could be doing. At a startup, you have the base salary and the equity might be turning into nothing, but you're not going to have any problem. Like it's such a good feeling when you feel that everyone is giving their best and you've kind of achieved something more than what you thought you would as a group and yourself. So I think that's a big difference I've seen, and that's the difference between old Uber and like later in my life Uber.
Wouldn't it be great if choosing how you feel was as easy as picking a song on your phone? Just tap a button to feel energized without any caffeine, or tap a button to feel relaxed when you're stressed. When I heard that a wearable device called HapBeat lets you change how you feel, I didn't believe it, so I had to try it myself. HapBeat works by delivering signals to give you the same sensation as caffeine, alcohol, and melatonin without any of those chemicals or side effects. Signals are like a song only your body can hear. They're made by Happy to replicate the unique magnetic signatures of popular everyday ingredients. Just by switching the signal on your phone, you can change how you feel. I love using signals to boost my energy, like drinking a cup of coffee or increase my focus when I need to crank out some work. They even have signals for getting deeper, more restful sleep. And that's how I've primarily been using Happy all this time, to get the deepest, most restful sleep I've gotten in a long time. Give Happy a try, and you're going to love it as much as I do. Order today, and you'll save 25% and get 90 days free access to all their signals. Take advantage of their 365-day guarantee today. Go to happbee.com/techmeme. That's HAPBEE.com/techmeme to save 25% on your order. happbee.com/techmeme. Cloud computing can be, let's just say, complex, but standing up reliable, affordable cloud infrastructure really doesn't have to be. At DigitalOcean, you can enjoy a comprehensive portfolio of compute, storage, database, and networking products that put your cloud infrastructure in capable hands so you and your teams can get back to doing what matters most, which is building world-changing apps that grow your business. You can choose from a wide variety of services for all compute, networking, storage, and database needs. Leverage popular CMS, e-commerce, web application frameworks, and developer tools to expedite development. There's even free round-the-clock technical support for all customers regardless of how much you spend with DigitalOcean. And always know what you'll pay per month with a flat pricing structure across all data center regions. Predictable pricing, robust product docs, and services that developers love. That's DigitalOcean. Get support at every stage of growth, from teams of 1 to teams of 1,000, with simple, powerful cloud computing. Get growing at DigitalOcean. Go to do.co/ridehome2022 to get started for free. That's do.co/ridehome2022. Gergely, the Pragmatic Engineer newsletter is the #1 technology newsletter on Substack. So I'm going to plug that for you right now. I'm not kicking you out of here because we're going to talk about Twitter and Elon Musk in a second. And actually, I will ask you what you've been hearing from Twitter employees about that. But is there anything else you want to plug aside from the newsletter?
That's it. So feel free to subscribe to the newsletter. It's free to do so. I also have a YouTube channel where I talk about things, and you can find everything at pragmaticengineer.com. From job board to companies that I invest in. I invest in some developer tool startups. It was great to be here, and I'm excited now. My newsletter / blog sometimes shows up on Techmeme, which is awesome.
Well, listen, look, you've got incredibly valuable stuff on there. So let me do this, and to the degree that you're comfortable doing it, let's go ahead and seg into the news of the day, man. What have you been hearing from people? Before we get into debating Twitter's existence and stuff like that, specifically, Gergely, what, if you have you been hearing from people inside Twitter? And actually, Chris, you might know people like that as well. What are Twitter people thinking about what's going on right now?
So I'm talking with engineers mostly. Obviously, that's who I talk with. And there's like two groups of people. Well, one thing that they share, they know nothing, and they're just refreshing the news. And this is kind of understandable because they're, like the board cannot share anything with them. But there's a big frustration of like, we know nothing, and we're getting all our information from the news or directly from Twitter or Elon on whoever. And they are worried a little bit of what will happen, because now a hostile takeover is on the table. It could happen, right? And they're worried about if this happened. They're now speculating. The biggest questions that they have, engineers, is what assuming Elon took over Twitter, would remote work stay? And some people who are remote work fanatics are worried if this happens, they're going to leave. And some people who have friends at Tesla are a bit worried about what the culture could change, assuming Elon Musk takes over. Because Tesla has a very different culture. Like again, both in terms of pay structure, people are doing well there, but it's not mentioned the same thing as Spang. And the last one, people fear for the culture. Right now, Twitter engineers at least have a super positive culture, very strong emphasis on diversity and inclusion. They all feel supported. They don't feel stressed. They feel there's a good work-life balance. They're fearing if Elon comes in, he's going to push people. They're going to throw out diversity and inclusion on the window. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think people are just afraid of potential culture change, because a lot of people went to Twitter because they liked this positive culture.
That is exactly what I wanted to talk about. And again, Gergely, if you stay with us, you're completely welcome. If you need to go, I know you're in a different time zone, so you're free to go. When I was thinking about this after I posted the show today, and Archie's whining in the background for some reason, the thing that I was thinking about was, if you're the Twitter board and you're going to do the fiduciary duty sort of thing, and et cetera, like there's all sorts of reasons which we could get into, even like specific financial reasons why they probably can't answer his letter yet. But one of the things that you would say is we can't accept this proposal because we have a certain culture here. We have talent that expects a certain culture and a certain way of doing things. And what is clear, and he said, I listened to the TED talk today, is he wants to change that. He wants to change how Twitter functions and what Twitter's mission is, essentially. And so I'm almost wondering, I think there's 100% chance, if it already hasn't happened, that the board will reject this offer. But I almost feel like there's no way that this can go through because of things like that. And by the way, Gergely had to bounce, so I'm asking this of you, Chris, and whoever wants to raise their hand to talk about this.
Yes. God, there's so much to sort of. I don't know if this is like armchair quarterbacking or contemplating like the changes that could happen as a result of this. I mean, I feel like the thing that I saw when I saw the news today, where he's like, look, you either accept my, 5420 offer, or I bounce and I take, and I sell my 10% stake, and then, the stock tanks or something as a result. I mean, it's a very, not just like aggressive, but sort of obnoxious and yet maybe necessary move. It feels like this game of chicken is kind of about saying, look, like the direction that Twitter has been on is one that doesn't really jive with how Elon sees the nature and the purpose and the utility of Twitter. And that is probably the deepest, concerning or open question as to, well, what does he really think about it? How much does he, or what are the parts that he does appreciate, and what of the culture, that is and has been, I think, being built up over the last several years at Twitter, are, what parts of those are relevant and what parts need to be removed. And I don't know ultimately if, so go ahead.
Well, that's my point, is that if you were the board and I think there was an all hands an hour ago or a couple hours ago or something like that, like, and you hear that, look, there's a revolt, then your fiduciary duty is the asset that this company has, aside from, the advertisers, aside from the community, aside from the users, is the talent. And if the talent is like hell to the no, then there's no way you can accept this. Now, can I tell you one other detail that I've heard from Wall Street folks, which is, interestingly, they don't necessarily have to respond, because if you read the letter legalistically, I'm not a lawyer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He has to state in there that he doesn't I made the joke in the title of the show today that financing secured. He doesn't actually have the financing, so they don't actually have to respond to this.
Somehow he has to essentially get liquidity and maybe sell a bunch of shares from
So this is not yet a and everyone says in the headlines it's not a binding thing because it can't be binding until he can prove to them that he has the money to make this happen. I don't know. I probably derailed what you were saying, but
well, I think so what you're asking, I mean, in a way, is whether or not this game of chicken that I've described is actually real, and whether it is likely to actually go through. And what you're saying is, well, if he doesn't even have the money or can't get liquidity, or there isn't some private backer that shows up, that's willing to put down the money to make it a real offer, then the board may not even need to consider it, and they can just move on. If, on the other hand, he is somehow able to marshal that level of resources and, do what he said, then it could go forward, and then they have to actually respond to it. I think what we're broadly asking is, what would the nature of change be, at a platform like Twitter? And what would those changes look like? What are some of the changes? Answer
that question for me. What do you think he wants to change? And I know I don't know if you listened to the TED Talk as well, but
I've not. I don't. That was today.
And he kind of didn't. Oh, edit button for sure. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, okay. Great.
If you had to pundit this, what do you think that he would want to change to Twitter?
Look, I mean, obviously, we can't get into Elon's head or what he really wants to do. He's clearly someone who cares a lot about freedom of expression, not being censored, having the ability to kind of do whatever he wants. As we talked about before, if you remember when we had the Tesla guy on, I think literally that's his YouTube name, right? I was sort of bringing up the point about how Elon is specifically neurotypical, and as a result is able to see things from a very different, I would say, unclouded, perspective that doesn't care so much about kind of the current politics or whatever. And so I think he's so effective at the things that he, works on because probably like Zuckerberg, has that Eye of Sauron effect where he starts to focus on it and is able to execute simply because he's able to ignore a lot of the, I don't know, whether it's niceties or the politics or whatever that a lot of humans tend to obsess themselves with, as opposed to thinking long term. And so the way that I would frame this question is, in 10 years' time, what is Twitter and how is it being used? And wild speculation, if Elon wants us to become a multi-planetary species, and he also wants to spread human consciousness throughout the galaxy, I know this is going to sound completely ridiculous and stupid, and I swear I haven't taken a gummy or anything like that yet. But Twitter could be the, kind of communication platform for this interplanetary species as a decentralized protocol. And this is something that I know, Jack Dorsey obviously has cared a lot about. It seems, and I don't want to, again, I don't know anything, and this is all speculation, and who cares about Chris Messina speculating about things. But if it's true that Jack and Elon have been talking for some time and talking about what happens next and talking about, crypto and Bitcoin, clearly they have a lens on where they think these things can go and are probably thinking through some of the implications of what could be unlocked if these things were, successful, and we didn't have to worry about the current situation or the current, I don't know, rules and laws and all these things that exist. So my question is, how does a project like Blue Sky, the initiative to decentralize Twitter, become successful? And it doesn't seem to me that with the incentives that are driving Twitter's business, i.e. advertising, that a project like Blue Sky has a clear path to success and to even launching, frankly. In whose interest is it for Twitter to become a decentralized platform and protocol? I don't know that it's the advertisers. I don't know that it's VCs.
I'm not sure that it's anybody's.
Correct.
Except for a broad society, but yeah.
Well, right. Exactly. Yeah. And so if you're thinking long term, the only way in which that could possibly happen is if an individual like Elon Musk buys the company, takes it private, and then makes that decision as the owner of the platform. Right? So if Jack Dorsey has been having this battle with Elliott, management, and they want, Dorsey to get 300 million users or whatever it is. And they have all these requirements from a business perspective for him to turn this thing into something else, to be somewhat competitive, with a Facebook or a Google. And they're like, well, that's not either what Twitter should be, nor is it kind of like the whole, germ of this idea like that. Like ruining it with ads, turning it into another AOL or Yahoo isn't really the way that we want to go.
Okay. That's again, back to the fiduciary duty thing is, Elon has said a couple times that, well, he's doing this as an investment, although he didn't in the TED Talk today, but I look, don't hold Elon to anything that he said one day.
An investment, like there'd have to be money that comes out of it, or cultural
but in the letter to the board, he says that I can unlock the value. Do you see
that money? The value doesn't have to be monetary, just to be clear. But continue. Sorry, continue.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, no, I was actually asking the question of if, and I know we're talking about billionaires and the equivalent
of have that level of money. It's like, what are you going to do except try to at least change the world in a way that, you think is ultimately.
Well, that's the Matt Levine argument, which is this is just his favorite game and he wants the game to run the way he wants it to run. But let's devil's argument that, because people, look, all of us, you and me and everyone in the world has been like, Twitter is so amazing and it's so not undervalued, exploited.
Twitter definitely like punches above its weight in terms of its usage and adoption in terms of cultural
without making
power.
As much money as it should based on its power. So,
I mean, if you're evaluating its success based on how much money it should throw off, right?
Okay, well, that's what I'm trying to say is like, do you see an Elon Musk argument that I can do this and I can turn Twitter into a $300 billion company?
I suppose the question is how, and what is it doing to make that money, and where is that money coming from? Are you charging all the users?
What would you? How would you change it? Like how would you get it more sticky? How would you?
Look, I mean, Twitter has a number of monetization projects that are going on right now. And it is unclear to me that any of them are successful. It is unclear to me like any projects that are currently on the web are going to rival, what Google did with, its search ad business, or what Facebook is doing with its attention business, attention advertising versus intent advertising. Like those are the two major things. People come to a platform like Twitter to express and to share and to see what's going on in the world. Now, granted, maybe there's a news angle to it, but even like CNN and CNN Plus, right, which wants to charge access for its news, and they got 10,000 signups over 2 weeks, and they were spending, I don't know, I saw ads across all the platforms that I'm on, trying to get people interested. And it seems like the product market fit is not there. People have an assumption about how content should be free, and so
whereas with Twitter, that's the fucked up funny thing about Twitter is the product market fit for news on Twitter. Yep. Is the greatest thing. And you just mentioned the ad business with Google, which is the most insane business model. But like in a similar way, what Twitter is for news for certain people, and not for everybody, because otherwise, they'd have a larger monthly active user base. But it is so completely perfect. And so like bringing up CNN Plus is interesting. It's almost like this is how news has to live this way.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're talking about news, because there is like the news industry, and then there's like news, right? Which is the phenomenon of new information that hopefully is valuable and useful, and has a perspective. Actually, our good friend Alex Kantrowitz was having a conversation with and Antonio Garcia Martinez on his recent podcast episode, and they were talking about this dynamic of what is journalism, and I think it's really, really valuable to put that conversation into this container, because there is news and there's the things that are like constantly going on that are like causing us to kind of like go mental because of how much our attention is being, attacked and then monetized, right? So you're putting things in front of people who are, constantly kind of being blared at. I call it like information waterboarding, which we actually choose to do. I mean, that is like the TikTok kind of experience. And there's a difference between that which is designed to just kind of like, provoke and keep you, kind of engaged versus, reporting and newsiness in journalism. Which I think you and I do, and I think you do much more so in some of the reporting and the context setting and the remembering on behalf of the listeners and the audience. And so to think about what Twitter is and what Twitter becomes and how Twitter functions in society, like it is an information circulatory system. So if it were to decentralize, then the question becomes, well, what is Twitter, the company, actually doing? Right? Is it the one that defines the protocols and sets the rules? Well, that's the type of governance.
I've said for years that Twitter should be a protocol.
Twitter was a protocol. Twitter started as XMPP.
Yeah. It should be like any email or whatever similar protocol. Wait.
And again, this is what Blue Sky is doing. So it is coming full circle. And then again, so the question that I'm trying to ask and frame, right? We went off target a little bit with asking about what is the value of news, and Bezos bought Washington Post, right? Is that a big moneymaker for him? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure.
I saw a great tweet where it was like Bezos buying the Washington Post. Meanwhile, buying Twitter is so much more effective in this day and age. I don't know. Yeah,
well, it depends on editorial, right? And I think that is one of the big questions. Like, is it similar to a Bezos buying the Washington Post and being more or less hands off? But then you do have this question, well, where does the money come from? And will negative coverage come out of the Washington Post about Bezos' initiatives? And I believe that the Washington Post folks try to at least say, Bezos is hands off, like he's not in the newsroom. He just, believes in supporting journalism, et cetera. But then you have on the other side, a lot of folks who are really concerned about, again, that news industry, like capital N, capital I, which has its own set of interests, which, previously as the fourth wall, seemed to have more independence or integrity or something, back in like the news muckraking days. And it feels like
muckraking,
some of that has been either neutralized, or the power of those platforms to define the nature of the conversation, what goes on there. Like once you are on the inside, once you're a Jack Dorsey or an Elon Musk, you see how the news determines how you speak. I mean, we've had this conversation about Future.com and Andreessen Horowitz, right? Once you get to a certain stature, you no longer want these platforms to sort of, or I guess the news media, the news industry, to be able to speak on your behalf. You want to have that free speech. I mean, we are engaging in a lot of free speech right now, and it's amazing. Like no government is going to come in and censor us. But if we wanted to get this out to the world through the news media says, well, you guys are not interesting, and so we're not going to put it out there. I think that even the conversation we just had with Gergely, like he is his own sort of journalist. He is talking about the engineer's experience. Where is there an engineer that is writing for a major news publication about the engineer's experience, right? It doesn't happen. So you have to have that independent media. And that's what Twitter largely is, in 280, bursts and so on. So I don't know, like, I guess I think that whatever it is that, Elon thinks that he wants to do with Twitter is probably quite different than the conventional types of things that we would think that he would want to do. I guess I would be hopeful, and maybe I'm naively hopeful, that the changes that he would want to make are more along the lines of kind of validating a decentralized, system, which is what he did with, he didn't make it decentralized, but certainly with space, the way that I always grew up thinking that space was something that only governments did. And he, proved that private companies actually are much more effective and efficient at it. And then he did the same thing with electric cars. Electric cars used to be shit. Like they used to be like the Leaf or the whatever the Toyota thing was. And it got like 12 miles, to a charge. And he proved that also wasn't the case. So is there a different version of Twitter that we can't even imagine? I think there probably is. And the fact that Twitter is still more or less the same as it was in 2006, there's been plenty of time to try a lot of experiments and do different things. And, as who did I see? I think Ryan Sarver tweeted about why, there hasn't been a lot of innovation on Twitter is because there's been just so much drama over the years that it hasn't been able to focus on just, shipping and getting things done.
So two more questions and then we'll wrap this. But
totally.
And listen, you can completely decline this one and we'll move on. But have you been hearing from anybody inside Twitter? I've seen some tweets of people subtweeting and obliquely talking about stuff. But do you have a sense of how people inside Twitter are feeling about the last week or so?
I mean, I think it's incredibly distracting.
You can decline. I'm offering you the opportunity to decline.
No. I don't think I've heard anything that's, I'm mostly actually what I'm seeing is actually on Twitter. There's a lot of people who work at Twitter who are tweeting about what's going on and about the sense of dread or fear or like what does this mean? And I've never worked at Twitter and I don't have, like that many insights about how the company kind of operates or functions today. But I got to imagine in the last couple of years, the company has probably come together, or people, who work at Twitter have come together in a way that's very different than it was previously. Certainly, with remote work and everything that happened with Black Lives Matter and with just cultural moments that happened on or with Twitter, and where the internal culture of Twitter seemed to want to become a lot more inclusive and a lot more aware of the negative experiences of the bullying, and the responsibility that these platforms had to address some of those concerns. I mean, a lot of the innovation, ironically, or I don't want to say like ironically, but maybe finally, has been about making Twitter a more inclusive and, safer space for a lot more people and a lot more voices. And that is new. And, I don't know if Elon wants to roll that stuff back and go back to the way it was before, if he wants things to be more like, Reddit or like the meme wars or like Discord or like these other kind of, seedy places on the internet. I hope that's not the case, but certainly given that he's kind of like, the meme lord and the troll in chief, maybe that's the way it would go. And so for people at Twitter, they're like, we have come so far and made so many improvements from a, cultural perspective, and for finally taking these interpersonal, kind of concerns more seriously and the role that technology can play in them, that I got to imagine that they're like really worried that their last 2 years are, possibly for naught.
That's why I think this is a dead rubber thing, at least, to the degree read Matt Levine and he'll tell us how a full hostile bid could happen. I want to real quick, because I did see, internally how the folks at TED managed to put Elon's thing up for free for people today.
What was the surprise? I think he said like there was one more thing or something.
Did I? You mean Elon said that?
No. Chris Anderson from TED.
Seemed
to imply that there was going to be something after the Elon talk.
Oh, well, I don't know, because by the time that happened, I was preparing for this. Okay. So I don't know. But I got to say, I saw internally them scramble and like put it together, and I was outside and I still could watch it. So like, holy shit, the fact that they put that video together that I could still stream. So that is,
impressive.
Yeah. And I saw them doing that this morning, like, well, we've got to take this behind the paywall. And I was like, okay. God bless you guys did it. All right, Chris.
Have you ever had a difficult client, someone who won't stick to the scope of work or refuses to pay? Do you ever wish you could ask a business lawyer to help? Let me introduce you to Rocket Lawyer, the affordable solution to help you establish, grow, or safeguard your business and work confidently. And did I mention you can try Rocket Lawyer free for 7 days? As a Rocket Lawyer Premium member, you'll be able to make documents you need to run your business and deal with clients. Ask a lawyer your legal questions and get an answer fast from an attorney in Rocket Lawyer's trusted network. Sign all your contracts at home or on the go with Rocket Sign. Plus, Rocket Lawyer members are covered by document defense, which means if there's a dispute over a Rocket Lawyer document, an attorney will personally review your situation and help prepare a response on your behalf. More than 2 million small businesses and freelancers have trusted Rocket Lawyer, and you can too. Head to rocketlawyer.com/workconfidently to start your free trial today. That's rocketlawyer.com/workconfidently. During this great reshuffle, a record number of employees are considering switching jobs. So now's your chance to try to attract them. LinkedIn Jobs is here to help you connect with the people you want to interview faster and for free. LinkedIn Jobs, the only platform Right Home Media has ever used to hire internally. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 770 million people. Then add your job and the purple #hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/ride. That's linkedin.com/ride to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
My last question for you about this, and this is serious. This is the question that I thought of last night when I first heard about this. And I've thought about this personally. What do you think could change in Twitter to make you stop using it?
Oof.
And you want me to go first so you can think about it?
Sure. Yeah. If you have some thoughts about it, yeah, go for it.
The thing that concerns me, if the talent leaves or whatever, and things go bad or whatever, and I don't know, Elon could buy it and shut down all our accounts and say, "Fuck you, everybody." Then we've got no choice. The thing, because, one of the things, I woke up to all the people being like, well, if Elon owns this, I'm out, and things like that. And I don't take that seriously because, whatever. But the thing that I have valued Twitter for my 15 years on there is that the people that I've curated that I trust, this is my best outlet to them. And so if they were to leave, or if a certain percentage of them were to leave, and they would maybe go somewhere else or whatever, but like that would be the thing, because the bottom line is it's the social graph for me, but it's the information graph. And again, I'm maybe a special case because this is what I do for a living. But like, if there were a certain percentage of people that were like, fuck this, in the same way that people left MySpace and things like that, then I would have to go to where they were, because what I value is their information flow, right?
Yeah.
So maybe there would be a period of time where I would still have Twitter, but then go to wherever everyone else went or something. So I'm just curious, is there something that you think could break Twitter for you?
One thing just to maybe, clarify, like what happened in MySpace was, a couple things. And I don't think that it was that people were like, fuck this, I'm out. It was more like there was a better thing. And MySpace still stagnated. And also like Facebook came along and made a clear, space.
Right. And all the people that you cared about went somewhere else. And that's kind of what I just said.
Sure.
Basically.
I mean, well, I think for me, and you've suggested this, like that would be a lot of people. Let me see. As of now, I don't even really check this, but I follow 8,000 people, right? I clearly don't see 90% or probably 95% of what people post, but the things that I do see, I do find incredibly valuable and interesting. It is my watering hole. It is how I stay connected. It is how I see the future and understand.
Yeah, I follow 2,200. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Like I understand like what's going on. So
if even 500 of those 2,200, depending on who they were.
Well, actually, but actually, one thing that's very important is that there are a lot of other people who I do not follow. Who those, if those are those 500 people, those people retweet and they share content from other people who I don't actually follow directly. So there's a discovery angle and like a sort of a flow of information across multiple networks that ends up finding me. That I think is very important. So I guess to try to answer your question, not only would there have to be sort of like a mass exodus, but, Twitter would need to cut off access to, the web, that you couldn't publish, I think one of the reasons why I don't find Facebook to be compelling and I literally, don't go there anymore. And I really barely go to Instagram anymore, is because the nature of the content has become, well, certainly on Instagram, one, a lot more commercial. So everyone's there trying to make a buck or sell something. So
this is so interesting. Keep going. This is so interesting.
Yeah. And it feels more extractive than it is generative. I honestly feel like, as much as there's stupid shit that happens on Twitter, every now and then I have an authentic honest engagement with someone that is, surprising and affirming and useful. On Facebook, it's sort of talking to the same people who you already know and are connected to. And I guess for me, it is the value of the exposure to new ideas or to new perspectives. It's that constant replenishment that I find so useful.
It's that. It's also the real time, which was also the thing that, back in the day, Zuckerberg was afraid about with Twitter, threatening what he was doing. But that's the key point. Like, I, like you, go on Facebook maybe once a month, and especially if I've got pictures of the kids that I want to show to the residual social graph that I have there. It's interesting that you say that Instagram to you is so empty because it's what did you say it was? It was
something more commercial and more transactional.
Yeah. Transactional. That's the word.
Yeah.
I find
that. Go ahead.
Go.
Well, I was just going to say, like, the purpose or the intent that I find for people sharing on Twitter, as much as there's like dunking and other stuff, like being clever and things like that, the terseness and the format and the content lends itself to an incredible dense amount of information that can be consumed relatively quickly. Even though, there's the statement that, an image is worth 1,000 words or whatever. I find that reading content on Instagram is actually much less efficient because I get through far less of it than I can on Twitter. And so there is a level of, composition in crafting terse, succinct, sort of info chunks and bytes that, just like allows me to traverse information in a way that sort of really fits into my brain. Every now and then I'll pop into TikTok, and you really have to kind of like work to get to the meaning or to get to the value.
It's so funny. TikTok is almost the inverse because it's almost like a lean back social network. Am I wrong about that? Like,
no, I mean, you're totally right. I mean, it's actually even better than TV because the content, really is not going to be, any longer than 30 seconds to like 3 minutes. And if you're bored, it's like channel surfing, but you just like flip your finger and it's just going to keep showing you things that are kind of maybe adjacent. And then every now and then we'll pop in something that's a little bit random. Like that's why to me that is kind of, again, self-chosen information waterboarding that's like, somewhat pleasurable. And yet you can't kind of get out of it. Whereas I think Twitter, and again, this is not about singing the praise of Twitter specifically. It's about how it functions in my life as a source of information from a plurality of sources. And
that's exactly what we're saying. Like, why? Okay. Something that you said about that, like the vitality. And again, I have a specific job where I need to know the news. But then even before I had this job for 15 years, like the vitality and the immediacy of the information that Twitter could give to me. And listen, we're different types of users. If you look at the monthly active user numbers, like we're a subset of a subset of a subset. But it is people that believe in Twitter know that it is the greatest product market fit for what they do and what they're interested in. And I do wonder, it is possible for those people, because they are so committed and engaged with the product, that you wouldn't have to tweak it very much for them to abandon it.
Do you know what I'm saying? I do. And it feels a little bit like you're kind of like having sort of a roundabout conversation about like MPS, where it's like, how bad would the product have to be for you to leave it? And what I think is really valuable.
That's literally the conversation we're having.
Right? Like, to think about is the origin of Twitter. And, this is the crazy thing that I don't know how to like think about this in alternative, kind of like the multiverse where there are multiple Twitters. It's like the Loki-verse, where there's just like lots of very, very different expressions. And in some ways that has happened, but they haven't really been interoperable. Like Casey Newton was on a space this morning talking about Plurk and talking about, what was the other one? Path was around for a little while. There are a number of expressions of different social media platforms that have come out, even in the mobile era, that have not really sustained or maintained as well as or as long as Twitter, has. And even if, Elon is pissed that, many of the top users on Twitter no longer come here to post anymore, there's still, sort of a core, base of, granted an aging user base, I suppose, but nonetheless, like we're still a significant, segment of the first era of social internet users that have a lot of, life and vibrancy, kind of like left in how we use these platforms. I guess the thing that I was just thinking about, with regards to other platforms like Snapchat and TikTok, is the move to visual, lean back communication and the use of video for expression. And the layering and the nuance that goes on in those formats is just entirely different than Twitter. And I think for a lot of people, and I don't know how the cold start is for people today, but if you were to start a new Twitter account, how bad is it relative to someone, who's been on the platform for, 12, 13 years?
But also, why would you be starting a Twitter account? Go start a TikTok account. Where
I'm saying something different. This is the problem.
Okay, go ahead. Okay.
Like for Penny, for example, right? Like for your kids, like if they're going to, yes, they will start on TikTok, they will bypass and probably never come to Twitter. So what does that mean? What does that mean for the platform, for its longevity, for its purpose? Or do you come to a certain point in your life or to a certain age where the format and the content and the ways of interacting on Twitter are actually exactly right and exactly what you want? And I don't know. Twitter is such an interesting, Facebook, in contrast, has changed the types of media objects that it supports. And it's moving rapidly into a future that is fully immersive, fully 3D. I can't even imagine how I'm going to publish in that space. Whereas Twitter is the most basic, the most primitive, fortune cookie sized pieces of content that are really easy for anybody that can type on a keyboard can produce.
It's a Zen cone,
Exactly.
Which is a poem, but yeah.
What are your final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thoughts would be this. I'm willing to bet that this is going to be a lot of mishigas about a bunch of stuff, and nothing's going to really come of it. But it's the first time that I've thought of one of these things going away. Well, no, that's not true, because TikTok could have gone away a couple years ago or whatever. But wait, what
do you mean? Oh, it could have gone away because of the whole Trump-China thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where in the way that if you were a Gen Xer coming up with baby boomers and there's rock and roll and there's 3 channels and things like that. This is a situation where I'm like, hey, 6 months from now, what will Twitter be like? Where we've felt for 15 years that Twitter is in the firmament. And, so this is one of those times where I'm even more than TikTok, because I'm not on TikTok. So, again, the kids experience that more than me. But I'm could this be completely transformed a year from now?
I think the real question that you're alluding to, and the reason why this moment is so important, is because first, Jack is no longer there as the, founder, CEO, calling the shots, deciding whether Twitter should or should not change. You've got a new CEO come in who really, has a pretty low profile overall. And Elon comes in and is like, this whole thing could be different and could be changed. And for all the complaints about the slowness of Twitter's innovation and change over the years, suddenly you have someone who may be on the precipice of being able to push the button that says Twitter is going to be completely different and
it could be better for Twitter as a business.
Correct. And it could be awful for everyone who uses it today. And that may also be completely necessary for Twitter to survive, for the next 5 or 10 years, because the media landscape is changing, because advertising is changing, because the things that will allow Twitter to persist may not be around or as abundant in those next 5 to 10 years. So that I think is like, that gives me a lot of pause. Obviously, you know, you and I love Twitter. We use Twitter all the time. We find great value from it. If Twitter were to go away, like you sort of, you know, were suggesting, like a TikTok sort of like it just up and vanishes or it's outlawed, what would I do? I don't have a great answer. You know, maybe we'd go back to RSS and blogs and email or maybe, you know, we have to blow the thing up in order to make it a decentralized, you know, system. You know, I don't know, but it's, if anything, it's pushing me to think differently about, I guess, the longevity of the platform and what purpose it serves, you know, going forward.
Yeah, specifically the longevity of Twitter. You know, no one's going to be able to, as Elon said on the TED thing today. Mark Zuckerberg, the 17th, he won't be able to fuck with Facebook 1,000 years from now or whatever. But like, yeah. Well, listen, Chris, you have a podcast platform now. So, anything you want to plug before we go?
Wow. No, but you know, like for anybody who's in the Bay Area or San Francisco, I am going to be going to a Republic happy hour. I don't often talk about my day job on the show very much, but I do have a day job. I am a product lead, and that's at Republic. I will pin a tweet to my profile about that if you want to come by and say hello. I'm actually going out in the world, you know, which doesn't happen very often. So
go see Chris. He's a nice guy.
Yeah. You know, come say hi and we can grab a beverage or something. Otherwise, you know, Brian, this is great. Anything you want to plug or anything you want to say?
No, I'm going to put together the non-squeaky chair. So we'll have it for next week. So
excited for that. Cool. All right. Well, go take care of your dog.
All right. Later, everybody.
All right. Thanks all. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.